The butterfly orchid. Is this as difficult to repot as everyone says it is? And how can I get it to flower? Can I get more than one flower at a time? All of these questions answered, and we'll give you a tip on how to make sure you can get more than just one bloom at a time. Welcome to the Nature Company. If this is the kind of information you're interested in, please hit that subscribe button down below if you haven't already, and that notification bell to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing. The butterfly orchid. This specific one is Psychopsis Mariposa. It's one of the hybrids, but often with most of these Psychopsis or butterfly orchids, they all pretty much have an almost identical appearance. It's sometimes a little bit difficult to tell the difference for the untrained eye, but they often have this sort of bronze and gold coloring to them. You do get the albiforms, which are basically yellow on yellow, but I think I actually just prefer this bronze and gold. It really is striking. And if you look at the flower and the color, you can almost see that resemblance to the dancing ladies, which is an oncidium. And this was originally in the oncidium family, but they divided them out into a species of their own, Psychopsis. But I know that's all very interesting and we don't really need to know that. Let's look at the plant itself. And we're often told that they can be very iffy in transplanting. And to a degree that's right, but also not. Let's look at the plant itself first. It's got that typical oncidium sort of appearance with those rounded pseudobulbs, but these are particularly almost circular and they're quite flattened. And instead of with a lot of other oncidiums that get multiple leaves, this only gets a single leaf off the top of each of those pseudobulbs. And each of these leaves are quite stiff and almost with a leathery cardboardy sort of texture, similar to what you might get out of Cattleya. Although I must admit they do have a bit of a phalaenopsis look to them, but not as smooth and also not quite as plump. So it's a relatively thinnish kind of stiff cardboardy leaf. This specific Psychopsis, the Mariposa, doesn't have particularly dark markings on the leaf, but you do get varieties that do have that almost sort of red background to the leaf with green markings, or green markings with red, whatever, but green and red. So you'll get still that beautiful leaf coloration with these amazing flowers. And these can bloom just about all year long. When your plant is mature enough, generally these flower spikes are started to produce as that new growths start becoming more mature and start producing the pseudobulb. That's when it will push up the flower spike. And we notice how long these flower spikes are. So these flower spikes will last for anything up to 10 to 12 years. So these are not ones that you are going to want to cut off after the flower is finished. The only time you're ever going to be cutting off these spikes is when they go brown and die. Because these, although I'm only getting a single flower off each one, are successive flowerers. So as this flower finishes, so the next bud above it in the next node will start to develop and then open and bloom. So each flower lasts for approximately a month, and the next bloom takes a month and a half then to develop and open fully. So you're going to have this continual flowering throughout the year if you keep your conditions right. If your conditions go off, your flowering is either going to be postponed or you might even land up with abortion. So we'll look into the reasons why that could happen. So here we're not into the mechanics of pollination or anything, but we're looking at the plant itself and how we can get those flowers to bloom. For proper cultivation of these Psychopsis, we're going to have to look at a few things that we need to get right. They're actually relatively easy orchids, and they do incredibly well indoors because they like pretty much the same environment that most people find comfortable, shall we say. These come from about central and just the northern part of South America through into Trinidad. So they're actually in quite a limited range as orchids go. So they all basically look for similar requirements. And that's going to be almost constant temperatures. They like a very even temperature. Temperatures of between 18 and 25 degrees constantly throughout the year. So that's about 65 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And that would probably be your day-night fluctuations more than anything else. But they can take temperatures very easily down to about 15 degrees, which is about 59 degrees Fahrenheit, and they won't complain. And they'll even take temperatures as low as 10 degrees, which is around 40 degrees Fahrenheit, but not for extended periods. So as long as your temperatures are coming back up, it shouldn't affect your plant too much. And now that I'm confused with all the numbers going around in my head, okay. So talking about the temperatures and the fluctuations, they like to get generally around a 5-degree fluctuation between your nighttime and your daytime temperatures. This is just your absolute ideal, and this is where they'll do their perfect best for you. It's not to say that they're not going to be able to manage anything outside of this range. That's just to give you an idea of what they're going to do best in. And if your temperatures are too low for too long, this is when you're going to start having either delay in blooming during that cold period, or you'll have these flower spikes, or not the flower spikes generally, but the flower buds aborting. And then all the plant will do is then wait until the temperatures come back up to a reasonable temperature, and then start growing up the next node in the flower spike and then produce its next bud again. So that's one of the nice things about these sequential bloomers, is that if you go through a point that you get bud blast or your buds start dropping off, you don't have to worry terribly much, because that bloom can still come again if you get those temperatures or that environment correct again. So you just have to wait a little bit, and you don't have to wait out the whole year waiting for a new spike to come up from the plant itself. So, and as I said again, these last for about 10 to 12 years. So you've got a lot of leeway in these. And when talking about temperature, what we need to include is humidity. The humidity also very easy requirements for these Psychopsis. They like humidity levels between 60 and 70%, which makes it relatively easy to do in the home, but they'll also accept humidity levels of as low as 50% without too much trouble. Just remember, as your humidity levels go up, so your watering has to increase, because evaporation is going to take place a lot quicker. Also, as your humidity levels get higher, you're going to have to make sure that there's more air circulation, so you don't allow that fungus and other nasties to really start growing and develop in your plant and kill it. So both sides, you've just got to keep an eye out on what you're doing so that we can keep it in its best health. And talking about watering and getting wet, or talking about getting wet and rotting, these plants love water. They don't like to be dry for too long. As soon as they start drying out, the pseudobulbs start to wrinkle. Again, your buds start dropping off the plant, and it's really traumatic for them. So they like to have a really, really well-drained media, but they like to have a percentage of moisture available to them all the time. That's why if you are able to keep those humidity levels up to that 60 and 70% 50% mark, it's going to be easier to manage. So you want to make sure it's well drained, but still holding moisture in the air around the roots especially, so that this plant doesn't go under water stress. But then again, being a part of the Oncidium family, if you water it too much, those fine roots are going to just rot off. So it's quite a delicate balance if you're not watching your plant to make sure that you get the watering right on this. But if you are able to get that nice well-drained media, so things like medium-sized bark chunks or any of those inorganic materials such as lacquer and charcoal, just to provide that nice aeration inside the media so that you can get the drainage but still hold some of that moisture. If you are using those inorganic medias, just remember, if you're using them by themselves, to water frequently. These don't have a rest period in winter. Because they like those constant temperatures, they're constantly in active growth. So your plant is going to be continually growing. So you want to be keeping your watering regime and your feeding regime enough to keep your plant healthy. Because we don't want it to go through any deficiencies, so that we can get these blooms all year long. And so how often are we going to water? Well, again, that depends on the media that you've got and the humidity of the environment that you've put it in. So just make sure just before your media reaches that dry point, water properly again. Give it a good solid watering to make sure that the media is completely wet and your roots have been able to absorb all the water that they need, and then allow that to drain freely again. So just keep an eye on it. That's going to be the best way to be able to manage your watering. I can't say just do it once a week or twice a week, because we're not sure what you're planting it in and the exact environment that you're growing it in. But just keep an eye on it, and it's actually relatively easy to manage. So when it comes to this watering, remember, if you are using organic media, you're going to have to repot relatively frequently, at least every second year or so, to make sure that you're keeping that environment suitable for its roots. And this is where that difficult to repot problem comes in. Actually, they're not really that difficult to repot. It's purely a matter of, generally you only land up repotting it when you notice something is going wrong. And by then, a lot of the roots have rotted off and the plant is not very healthy. So what happens is it just takes a while for the plant to re-establish itself. And that's why a lot of people say that they're so difficult to repot, is because generally they're repotting it a bit late. You want to make sure that you get in early enough to repot it. A good time to repot is when those new growths are about 5 centimeters or so long. Then that's when they are going to start forming their new roots. And that's when you've got to get in and quickly do the job that needs to be done, repot it in that nice well-drained media, and generally your plant doesn't even notice it. Try not to disturb the roots too much in your repotting if you're able to, but if you're doing it often enough, the media should still be loose enough that it's not going to cause too much trauma to the plant, removing it. And then you ask me, will I lose the blooms? Do I need to cut the flower spikes off when repotting? No, you don't. You can leave the plant as it is, even with its new little buds forming, and do your repot. And sometimes these buds won't even take a notice that it's been repotted, and they'll open up and produce their bloom. If you do find it gets a little bit of transplant shock and it goes backwards and falls off, don't worry. Remember, you've got the next bloom that will come up. This is the amazing thing about these sequential bloomers. You're not going to miss a blooming season. So we've done the media and the repotting, and the temperature, the light. Don't forget the light, because this is the major component into the blooming of Psychopsis, is the light. They need lots and lots of light. They'll even accept morning light, or should I say full sun in the morning, and then some more shade throughout the day. So they want a nice bright spot, and they want almost at least 10 hours of light a day to produce these blooms. So if you're wondering why your plant isn't blooming, if you've checked to make sure that there's no rotting happened and your plant still doesn't want to bloom, there's one more trick you can do, is you can reduce the temperature. If you've been keeping these at 18 degrees and above, then what you want to do is just drop your temperature down slightly to between 13 and 15 degrees for about a week or 2 weeks, and hold it at that constant temperature for a while. And if that doesn't force any blooms or any flower spikes to come, then it's your lighting conditions. You're not giving the plant enough light. So you'll have to add some alternative light source, perhaps artificial light, some grow lights or something, just to give it that sort of 10 hours of daylight that it needs to force those flower spikes to come. So we've done temperature, humidity, watering, media, light, and I think that's it, except for the one little trick that we've got up our sleeves to try and force more blooms onto these plants. Because although this one already has 3 flower spikes, they're all individual spikes, all producing only a single bloom of each. But if we notice on this spike here, we have a branched spike. Now there's a little bit of an interesting thing. What happened here? Well, there was a little bit of an accident here, and the top of this spike got broken off. So here where the bloom had come, it started to branch out, and it's producing another bud here at the tip. So is there a way that we're going to be able to use this to our advantage to perhaps get multiple branches on a spike and multiple flowers at the same time? Well, there's a handy little trick that I've heard about, and we're going to try and do it ourselves. At each of these nodes along the length of these flower spikes, we can see these little swellings underneath the sheath. And as all good gardeners will tell you, there's a node there. And we have heard that these Psychopsis can produce kikis off their flower spikes as well. So if we can find a way to damage the stalk without removing it or breaking it, will we be able to get more branches coming out for more blooms and perhaps even a kiki coming off it? Well, there's only one way to find out, and it's to try. What we're going to be doing is taking these plant ties. Well, they're not actually plant ties, this is Scooby wire, but you can use twist ties or anything like that, preferably something with a wire inside that it can be wound on and then wound off later, because you don't want to leave it on there all the time, because that could cause permanent damage to the flower spike, and that's not what we want. We just want the flower spike to branch. We just want to make the flower spike think that there's a problem and react and produce more of those branches for us. So what we're going to do is go just above these nodes here, wrap our wire around, and we're going to be twisting it tight. We're going to be twisting it tight enough to actually squeeze slightly into that spike so that it's restricting the nutrients and water up through the plant itself. And then what we're hoping is that that will then indicate to the bud below where we're doing it that there's a problem above it. and that it should then start to try and produce more growth. So we're going to give it a good tight squeeze, but not too tight that it's actually going to break the flower spike itself. Just enough to squeeze it on. And be gentle with these flower spikes. Although they're quite hardy, they're also quite brittle, so they'll snap quite easily. So just be gentle doing it. And this one I'm doing slightly lower down because I want to see if I can produce a kiki off these lower basal nodes where the flower spike is a little bit thicker and stronger, and perhaps we can get a kiki off there. There we go. So the nice thing about doing this is these are going to be easy to unwind later without leaving any permanent damage on the plant. So now we just wait and see if we can produce more of those little branches and more happy flowers. So there we go. All we're doing now is waiting, and we'll keep you updated as to the progress. If you've got any other suggestions on ways that you might have done this or tried this, drop that in the comment box below. It will be interesting to see who's actually tried this and had any other success out of it. And if you're looking for any other extra information, Edward's continually putting new information into that Buy Me a Coffee link down below. Feel free to go down and see what he's put up there. And thank you for watching. If you found any of this information helpful, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button down below, and that notification bell, bing bong, to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing. Help us grow as we help your orchids grow.